So this is our presentation on the methods section of our article. And we are looking at the checklist. So the first topic we're going to look at is the subjects and the participants. And so the subjects, the participants, or specimens were adequately described. So in our article, we are told that there are 36 preschool age children who were age and gender matched. So there's 18 children who stutter, and of those 18 children, there's 16 male, 2 female, with an average age of 4 years and 5 months. And there's 18 children who do not stutter, and they're 16 male, 2 female, and the average age is 4 years and 6 months. So the sample size was adequate. So we said yes. So even though there's 36 preschool age children and the sample size is small, it's large enough to obtain the data that was needed. And the selection criteria was adequate and clearly defined. So all were paid volunteers recruited through an advertisement in a monthly parent magazine circulated throughout Syracuse, and an email advertisement sent to Syracuse University employees. The study procedures were approved by the Syracuse University Institutional Review Board. Informed consent by parents and verbal assent by children were obtained. Exclusion criteria were adequate and clearly defined. So the study aimed to advertise to parents of preschool age children with stutter and children who don't stutter by advertising in parent magazines, and to employees of Syracuse University and the staff who live and work near the university. Differential subject selection posed no threat to internal validity. So these participants were all paid volunteers, and their age and gender matched. So precisely to avoid any effects of extraneous variables on the variables being researched. And interaction of subject selection and treatment posed no threat to external validity. So the study procedures was approved by the Syracuse University Institutional Review Board. And data collection procedures took place during 2 visits to Syracuse University Stuttering Research Laboratory. Participants' speech, language, and fluency skills were assessed during the first visit, and the experimental tasks were conducted during the second visit. Evidence of adequate protection of subjects and participants. So we said yes, that there was evidence of adequate protection of subjects and participants, as the study was, like we said prior, the study procedures were approved by the Syracuse University Institutional Review Board, and also there was informed consent by parents and verbal assent by the children was obtained prior to the study. So overall, we said that this part of the methods section of the subjects participants, we gave it overall rating of excellent because all aspects were covered regarding the participants and the subjects in the methods section of our article. The next topic we looked at was the materials section in the methods section. And instrumentation and/or behavioral instruments were appropriate. So since we have young children, we want to use appropriate toys and instruments to get the data. So we said that there was appropriate behavioral instruments. At the first visit, they engaged in spontaneous play with age-appropriate toys to elicit the occurrence of stuttered and normal disfluencies, which classified which group the child would be in. And the 2 groups were children who stutter and the children who do not stutter. And then at the second visit, the child was presented with negative and neutral pictures, and then they were asked to repeat the phrase "Bye Bobby, a puppy." And from that, levels of emotional arousal was recorded. So it was very simple instructions and appropriate instruments that they used by showing pictures and having them repeat a simple phrase. Calibration procedures were described and were adequate. So we said that there was no explicit information about the calibration procedures. We saw the only thing that's stated was that standardized procedures for electrodermal activity recordings were implemented, and the data were visually inspected during data collection to monitor for any instances of artifacts. and evidence presented on reliability and validity of instrumentation or behavioral instruments. So to physiologically validate the levels of emotional arousal that are targeted in each of the experimental conditions, skin conductance level and phasic skin conductance level of responses were measured during the baseline. And the baseline was a screensaver picture that was just of a fish tank, and there was not much going on in that picture in the viewing, and the two experimental conditions, which were the neutral and negative picture viewing.
So adequate selection and measurement of independent variables. So as mentioned prior, the independent variables were the 36 preschool age children, of which 18 stuttered and 18 do not stutter. Also our picture stimuli, which was negative and neutral, which was to cause an emotional arousal. um, Adequate selection and measurement of dependent variables. So again, our dependent variables were the physiological arousal, the spatial temporal index STI, which is a measure of the speech coordination, and the mean duration of the target phrase. So our overall rating for the material section was good because we do not have adequate information on the calibration procedures, but everything else was good. Now moving on to our procedure section. So task and research protocol were adequately outlined. So the procedure section was divided in a way that allowed one to understand what was being done. Specifically, they broke it down into sections. So one section spoke about the procedure to classify the kids into groups. Another section spoke about obtaining pre-experimental baselines. Another section spoke about speech stimuli, specifically how they chose the speech utterance by Bobby a puppy because it had previously been used to study speech motor coordination in preschool age children. And additionally, the amount of bilabial consonants allowed for lips to be engaged during articulation. There was a section about the emotion elicitation stimuli, which spoke about the photographs used, and another section that spoke about experimental stimuli or experimental setup. The test environment was described and it was adequate. So they described that in the first visit of the child, he or she engaged in spontaneous play. And on the second visit was where they conducted the actual experiment, and the test environment was in a room with a computer where the child would speak after viewing negative or neutral pictures. The subject instructions were appropriate and consistent. So the child was shown a picture and asked to repeat bye Bobby a puppy 3 times and again and again. The experimenter and human observer bias was controlled. So technology was used to collect data. And although no calibration info was provided, they did mention using standard procedures and watching for artifacts. Specifically, they used the BioPack MP150 hardware system to obtain electrodermal activity. They used the OptoTrack camera system to obtain movement data of the upper lip, the lower lip, and the jaw during the child's speech. The kinematic data from the target phrases were processed in custom lab routines following the procedures established by Smith. Also, the experimenters listened to each repetition of the target phrase and included only those productions that contained no errors or moments of stuttering in the STI calculations. So procedures were appropriate for the research design. So the researcher wanted to measure how different picture stimuli affects the speech motor control in children who stutter and do not stutter. So therefore they showed negative and neutral pictures, then asked the child to repeat a phrase and measured the speech motor coordination. The phrase "bye Bobby a puppy" was chosen again because it had previously been employed to study speech motor coordination in preschool age children. So the procedures reduce threats to internal validity arising from history and maturation. So in Regards to history, the caregivers of all participants reported that their children had normal vision, English as the primary language, and no history of neurological diseases or diagnosed speech language disorders apart from stuttering. The information regarding maturation was found in the results section, but the article specifically said, our findings that the younger participants produced more variable articulatory movements than the older participants aligned with the speech motor skill approach. These results suggest that young children's speech motor coordination becomes more stable and the movement variability decreases with maturation and lends support to the growing number of studies that demonstrated a decrease in speech movement variability in children through maturation and development. So procedures reduce threats to external validity arising from one interactive pretest. So children viewed an animated screensaver of a three-dimensional fish tank for 4 minutes. The screensaver contained minimal action and had been previously successfully used to establish baseline levels of skin conductance activity in preschool age children. Two, subject selection. So subjects are selected very specifically, and multiple treatments. So the subjects were evaluated on 2 separate visits and multiple different trials. And yes, data analysis and statistical methods were clearly described and adequate. So statistical analysis of the data were performed in IBM SPSS version 24 statistics software using linear mixed effects model. The mixed model design included a group, children who stutter and do not stutter, as the between participant factors and conditions, neutral picture viewing and negative picture viewing and trial first and second as the two within participant factors. The mixed effect models allowed for testing for the overall group effect, condition effect, and the interaction between. So the rating for this procedure section is good because minimal information is provided about procedures that would reduce threats to internal validity in the method section. So our overall rating for the method section is that overall the method section can be rated as excellent. It contains the necessary information that the checklist provided, ensuring that the experiment will run smoothly.